everyone, and welcome back to the Easy Agile podcast. Today, I'm talking to Shane Raubenheimer. Did I get that correct?
Raubenheimer.
Raubenheimer. Close.
Yeah,
Close, close.
close. Yeah.
Who's with us from Adaptavist. And today we're talking about why your retrospectives keep failing and how to finally fix them. And Shane, you and I have spent a fair amount of time together
Yeah.
exploring the topic of retros, haven't we? Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself first?
Yeah. Hello everyone. I'm Shane Raubenheimer from Adaptavist. I am an Agile coach and technical consultant, and yeah, along with Jaclyn, we've as she's mentioned, we've had loads of conversations around why retros don't work and how they're just a tick box. And yeah, and hopefully we're going to demystify some of that today.
Excellent. What's your background, Shane? What kind of companies have you worked with?
So I've been privileged enough to work across multiple industries, everything from petrochemical to IT to digital television, food industry. So yeah, all different types of applied work, but with the agile philosophy.
Excellent. A big broad range. I should introduce myself as well. My name's Jaclyn. I am a senior product manager here at Easy Agile, and I look after our team rhythm product, which helps teams realize the benefits of being agile. I stumbled there because our whole purpose at Easy Agile is to enable our customers to realize the benefits of being agile. My product focuses on team and teamwork. And teamwork happens at every level, as we know. So helping our customers break down work and estimate work, reflect, which is what we're talking about today, and most importantly, take action to improve their ways of working. I am an Agile coach by trade as well as a product manager and spent about 5 years in a heap of different industries, both as a consultant like you, Shane,
Yeah.
and as an in-house coach as well. All
Brilliant.
right, let's jump in. So, my first question for you, Shane, and we'll just sort of, kick off the conversation here. I hear a lot that teams get a bit bored with retros or they they face sort of reoccurring issues in their retrospectives. Is that your experience? Tell me a bit
Abs
about what you've seen.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think often it's what should be a positive roll up and action of a sequence of work turns out to normally become a checkbox exercise. There's a lot of latency in the things that get uncovered and discussed, and they just tend to perpetually roll over, and it almost becomes a checkbox exercise from what I've seen, rather than the mechanism to actively change what is happening within the team, but more importantly, from influences outside the team. And I think that's where retros fail, because often a team does not have the capability to do any kind of upward or downstream problem solving, and they tend to just mull about different ways to ease the issues within the team by pivoting the issues rather than solving them.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think something that I see regularly too is because they become that checkbox, teams get really bored of them. And
Absolutely.
they do them because they're part of their sprint, part of their work, but they're not engaged in them anymore. It's just this thing that they have to do. And it also can promote a tendency just to look at what's recently happened and within their sphere of influence to solve. Whereas I think a lot of the issues that sometimes pop up are also things that leadership need to help teams resolve,
Absolutely. Mm.
or they need help to solve, and it can end up with them really focusing on, oh, well, there's this one bit, in how we do our code. We've got control over that. We'll try to fix that. Or, as you say, the same recurring issues come up and they they don't seem to get fixed. It's the same whinge, if you like, every time.
Absolutely. And you find ways that you kind of, put a band-aid on them just so you can get through into the next phase. And I think the problem with that is the the impact that broader issues have on teams is never completely solvable within a space, and it's no one else's mandate necessarily to do it uh, when an issue is relatable to a team. So exposing why it's not a team specific issue and it's more environmental or potentially process driven, that's the bit that I feel keeps getting missed.
Yeah, I think so too. Um, the other thing you just sort of sparked for me there was um, the reoccurring issue. I think that also happens when the team are under pressure and they don't feel like they have the time to solve the problems. They need to get into the next sprint. They need to get the next bit of work done. Or maybe that thing that they need to solve is actually a larger thing. It's not something small that they can just change. They need to, like, thinking about things like testing strategies and things. If that's not working for you and you know it's not just about fixing a few flaky tests, it's you need to relook at how you're approaching testing. It seems overwhelming and a bit too big.
Absolutely. And often environmental issues um, are ignored in favor of what you've been mandated to do. So it almost becomes so you almost retrofit the thing as best you can because it's an environmental issue. But I think how finding ways to expose that as a broader based issue, I think that should be the only output, especially if it's environmental and not team based.
Mm, yeah, I agree. Um, Something I've also seen recently is that teams will come up with great ideas of things that they could do. And as I said before, sometimes they're under pressure and they don't feel they have the capacity to make those changes. Sometimes those actions get talked about, everyone thinks it's a wonderful idea, and then they just get forgotten about. So teams end up with this big long backlog of wonderful experiments and things that they could have tried that have just been, they're out of sight, out of mind. Have you seen much of that yourself?
Plenty, yes. And often teams err on the side of what's expected of them rather than innovate or optimize. And I think that's really where explaining the retrospective concept to people outside fully stacked or insular teams is the point here, because you need, very much like in change, you need somebody outside the constructs of teams to almost champion that directive, the same way as you would do lobbying for money or transformation, right? It needs to be taken more seriously and incorporated into not just teams being mini factories supporting a whole, because you transform at a company level, you change manage at a company level, so you should action retrospective influences in the same way. Naturally, you get team level ones, and that's normally where retrospectives do go well, because the teams because it's the art of the possible and what you're mandated to do. And I think bridging the gap between what we can fix ourselves and who can help us expose it is a big thing. So absolutely, I see so much great work going to waste because it just simply isn't part of the day job, or
Yeah.
should be, but isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know, particularly, in the pre-COVID times when we were doing a lot of retros in person or mostly in person with stickies
Yeah.
on the walls, I also found even if we took a snapshot of the action column, it would still end up on a Confluence, board or something somewhere and get forgotten about. And then the next retro comes around and you sort of feel like you're starting fresh and just looking at the last sprint again, and they're like, "Oh yeah, someone raised that last retro, but we still didn't do anything about that." Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think product owners, Scrum Masters, or any versions of those kinds of roles need to treat environmental change or anti-pattern change as seriously as they treat grooming work, the actual work itself, because it doesn't matter how good you are, if the impediments that are outside of your control are not managed or treated with the same kind of importance as the actual work you're doing, that'll never change. It'll just perpetuate, and sooner or later you hit critical mass. I mean, there's no scenario where your predictability or velocity gets better if these things are inherent to an environment you can't control.
Yeah, that's true. And we've talked about action items being first class citizens and how we help teams do that for that exact reason. Because a retro is it's helpful to build relationships and empathy amongst the team for what's happening for each of them and feel a sense of um, community, I guess, within their team. But the real change comes from these incremental changes that are made from, and that they're the conversations that spark the important things to do to make those changes to
Absolutely.
improve how the team works. So, that action component is really the critical part, or maybe, one of two critical parts of a retro. And I feel like sometimes it's the forgotten child of the retro. Everyone focuses a lot on engaging people in getting their ideas out, and there's not as
Yeah.
much time spent on the action items and what's going to be done or changed as a result.
Absolutely. Yeah. Consistently. And I think it's symptomatic potentially for how retros are perceived. They're perceived as an inward facing insular reevaluation of what a team is doing. But I've always thought in the same way you have the concept of team of teams, or if you're a scaled environment like a PI planning, I feel retrospectives need the same treatment, or need to be invited to the VIP section to become a part of that, because retrospectives, yes, they're interested, they're insular or introspective, but they need to be exposed in the same kind of um, uh, sentences as things like managing your releases, or training, or QA, and they're not. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like a lot of things they've fallen foul of, the sometimes contentious agile word. And so
Yes.
people tend to think, oh, retros, it's just one of those agile ceremonies or agile things that you do. So yeah, the purpose of them can get really lost in that, and the important and how useful they can be in creating change. At the end of the day, it's about improving the business outcomes. That's why all of these things are in place, and you want to improve how well you work together so that you can get to the outcome quicker. So yeah,
Absolutely. Outcome being the operative word, not successfully deploying code, or
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 ticking the
pieces of
retro
work.
box,
Yeah,
successfully having a retro.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, doing agile instead of being agile, right?
100%. Yeah. Um, it also strikes me that there is still a tendency for retros to be only at a team level and only a reflection of the most recent period of time. So, particularly if a team are doing Scrum or some version of Scrum with sprints, to look back over just the most recent period. And I think sometimes the two things, the intent of a retro, but also the prime directive of the retro gets lost. So, in terms of intent, you can run a retro about anything that, think about a post-mortem when you have an incident and everyone gets together to discuss what happened, how we prevent that in the future. I think people forget that you can have a retro and look at your system of work and even home in on something like, how are we estimating? Are we doing that well? Do we need to
Absolutely.
improve how we're doing that? Take one portion of what you're working on and interrogate it.
Absolutely. I mean, and then, you just default to your point. You just default to the what's good look like, what can we change, what should we stop or start doing, and that's great and all, but without some kind of a trended analysis over a period of time, you might just be resurfacing issues that have been there all along, right? And I think that's where the concept or the lack of understanding of anti-pattern comes in,
Mm.
because you're measuring something that's happened again rather than measuring or quantifying why is it happening at all. And I
Yeah.
think that's a big mistake of retros. It's almost it's very much like an iterative band-aid.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit more about some of the anti-patterns that you have seen or how
So
they come into play.
so one of them we've just touched on. I think the buzzword for it is the cargo cult, culture for agile, and that's just cookie cutting agile, doing agile because you have to instead of being agile. So literally making things like your stand up or your review or even planning just becomes a okay, well, we've got to do this, so we've ticked the box, and we're following through. So that's a very big one. Not understanding the boundaries of what your method is, whether you like it, playing Wagile or whether you waterfall sometimes, agile at other times, and you mistake that variability as your agility, but instead you don't actually have an identity. You're course correcting blindly based on it's proportionate to what kind of fire you got in your way.
Mhm.
So I think another big anti-pattern is not understanding the concept of what a team culture means and why it's important to have a team goal or a working agreement for your team. Yeah, almost your internal contracting. I mean, we do it as employees, right? So, and I think those, just to name a few, but I think a lot of other anti-patterns come in where something is exposed within a team process, and because it's not interrogated or cross-referenced across your broader base of teams, it's not even recognized as a symptom. It is just a static issue,
Mm,
and so that's not an actual anti-pattern, but for me it's a real anti-pattern in a lot of ways. um, Directive around what to do with retrospectives externally as well as internally, that's a big anti-pattern for me because
mm.
it's not a thing. It's simply not a thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. For anyone watching or listening, if you're not familiar with anti-patterns, they're common but ineffective responses to recurring problems. So they may seem helpful initially to solve an immediate problem, but they ultimately lead to negative outcomes. So Shane, the what you just spoke about there, retrospectives, an example of that is that the team feel disengaged with retrospectives and that they're not getting anything useful out of it or change isn't resulting from the retrospectives. And so the solution is to not hold them as frequently, or to, stop doing them, or not do them at different levels or at different times. And that's a really good example of an anti-pattern. It does appear to fix the problem, but longer term, it causes more problems than it solves. Because another one that I see is always with breaking down work and the the idea that spending time together to understand and gain a shared understanding of the work and the outcome that you need takes a lot of time, and breaking down that work and uh, getting aligned on how that work is going to break down on paper, it can look like quite an investment, but it's also saving time at the other end, reducing risk, reducing duplication and rework to get a better outcome quicker. So you shift the time spent in development contracts because you've spent a little bit more time discovering and understanding what you're doing. And yeah, a common anti-pattern that I see there is spent way too long looking at this. So we're going to not do discovery in the same way anymore, or one person's going to look at that and break it down.
I always liken it to your budget. Like the retrospective is always the nice shiny holiday. It's
Yeah,
always the first to go. It's always
it's the contractor.
yeah, yeah, and it's almost like exposing stuff that everybody allegedly knows to each other is almost seen as counterintuitive because we're just talking about stuff we all know. And it often gets a likened to, okay, well, we'll just do that in planning. But the reality is the concept of planning and how you amend what you've done in the retrospective, that's a huge anti-pattern, because flattening those structures, or from ceremonies perspective, is what teams tend to do, because of your point of, well, we're running out of daylight for doing actual development. But it's it's hitting your head against the wall repeatedly and hoping for a different outcome without actually implying a different outcome. I mean, use a different wall even. I just, like, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you get it. Yeah. And I think it's because people are so disillusioned with retrospectives. I firmly believe it's not an internal issue. I believe if the voices are being heard at a budgeting level, or at a Manco level, it will change the whole concept of the retrospective.
Mm, I like it. And that's a good thread to move on to. So what do we do about it? How do we help change this? What are the things, the practical tips that people can deploy?
So I think a practical tip, and this is going to sound like an obvious one, is actual and sincere buy-in. What I mean by that is, I mean, as a shareholder, if I am if I'm basing your performance and your effectiveness on the quality and output of the work that you're promising me, then I should be taking the issues that you're having that are repeating more seriously. Because if you're course correcting for 5, 6, or 7 sprints, and you're still not getting this increasing predictable velocity, then, and if it's not your team size or your attitude, it's got to be something else. And I often relate that to it being environmental. So buying into the outputs for change the same way as you would into keeping everyone honest, managing budgets, and chasing deadlines. It should all be part of the same. They should all be sitting at the VIP table. And I think that's a big one.
Mm, I think so too. And something that occurs to me, and it goes back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, is sometimes identifying that there's a pattern there and that the same thing keeps coming up isn't actually visible. And there's the
At
first
all.
part of the problem, right? I know some things we've been doing in product around that recently, attempting, to help teams with this. So we've recently started surfacing all incomplete action items in retrospective, so people can see that big long list. And because they can convert their action items to Jira items, work items, they can also see where they've just been sitting and languishing in the backlog forever and a day and never been planned for anything to be done about them.
Yeah.
Um, and we've added a few features to sort and that kind of thing. Coming, in the future is, and we've been asked about this a lot, is, what about themes? What about things that are bubbling up? So that's definitely on our radar that will be helpful. And I think that understanding that something has been raised, a problem getting support from another team, or with a broken tool or an outdated tool that needs to be replaced in the dev tooling or something like that. If that's been popping up time and time again and you don't know about it, then even as the leader of that team, you don't have the ammunition to then say, look, this is how much it's slowed us down. And I think we live in such a data world now. Those actions are also where the evidence is that this is what needs to change and this is where the barriers are. And
Certainly, yeah, yeah, and I agree. Touching on the old trend analytics approach, I mean, we do trend analysis on everything except what isn't happening, or what is actually going wrong. Because
Mm.
we track the fallout of said lack of application. We don't actually trend or theme. To your point, we theme everything when we plan, yet somehow we don't categorize um, performance issues as an example. I mean, if everybody's having a performance issue, that's a theme. It's
Yeah.
it's and it so we almost need to categorize or expose themes that are outward facing, not just inward facing. Because it's
Mm.
all well and good saying, well, our automated testing system doesn't work. I mean, well, what does that mean? Why
Yeah.
doesn't it work? And I think it should inspire external investigation. I mean, when you do a master data cleanup, you don't just say, well, most of it looks good. Let's just put it all in the new space. You literally interrogate it at, at its most definitive and lowest level. So why not do the same with theming and trending um, environmental issues that you could actually investigate, and that could become a new initiative
Mm.
that would be driven by a new team that didn't even know it was a thing.
Yeah. And you're also gathering data at that point about to evidence the problem rather than, oh, it's a pain point that keeps coming up. It is, but it gives you the opportunity to quantify that pain point a little bit as well. And that I think is sometimes really hard to do when you're talking about developer experience or team member experience, even outside of product engineering teams. You know, there are things in the employee experience that affect the ability for that delivery, whatever you're delivering, to run smoothly. And you want to make that as slick as possible, and that's how you get the faster outcomes.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can never underestimate the human factor as well, right? So if everything I'm doing, and I know everything that every member of my team is doing is to the best of not their capability only, but to the best of their ability in what they have available to them, you become jaded. You become frustrated because if you're hitting your head against the same issue, regardless of how often you're pivoting,
Mm.
that can be very disillusional, especially if it's not been taken as seriously again. And I'm harping on about this as your work output. You know, we run a week late for a customer to deliver a customer project. We start complaining about things like money, we budget, overspend, overutilization. But if it's but identifying systematic or environmental issues that you can actually quantify should be treated in exactly the same way. So I feel
Mm.
very strongly about this.
That's all right. Yeah, we tend to nerd out about this stuff, Shane, and you're in good company. Uh, you've also reminded me, so we've put together a bit of a workshop to help teams and people understand how to get the most out of their retrospectives, and not just in terms of making them engaging, but fundamentally how to leverage actions to make them meaningful and impactful. We've spoken a lot about the incremental change that's the critical factor when it is something that's within the team's control or even closely, to the team's control. That's how you get that expansion of impact, is the slow incremental change. Um, we've talked about sometimes those action items seem overwhelming and too big. What's your advice if that's the scenario for a team? What do you see happen and what can they do?
I follow I would suggest following the mantra of if a story is too big, you don't understand enough about it yet, or it's not broken down far enough, right? So incremental change should be treated in exactly the same way. You know, the eat the elephant one bite at a time analogy. So if it's insurmountable, identify a portion of it that it'll make it a degree less insurmountable next time, and so on and so forth, right? And if we're iterating work delivery, problem solving should be done in rapid iteration as well. That's my view. Yeah.
I like it. I like it. And so I think we're almost wrapping up in terms of time. What can people expect from us if they join our webinar not next, July 10, I believe it is, where we
Uh,
dive and nerd out even more about this topic, Shane?
I think the benefit of the webinar is going to be a practical showing of what we're waxing lyrical about. You know, it's easy to speak. You know, getting a teleprompter and evangelizing is one thing, right? But I think from the webinar we'll show a very abridged version, but we'll show turning our concepts into actual um, actions that you can eyeball and see the results of. And so I think with our approach that we took to our workshop, I think people will very quickly get the feeling of this is a dealing with cause and effect in a cause and effect way. So practical. So to put that in one sentence, an active showing or demonstration of how to quantify and actually do what we've been waxing lyrical about. That's what I think.
Excellent. That was a lovely summation, I think, Shane. And if anyone is interested in joining, we urge you to do so. You can hear us more talking about that, but get some practical help as well. There is a link to the registration page in the description below. And I think that's about all we have time for today. But Shane, as always, it's been amazing and lovely to chat to you and hear your thoughts on a pocket of the agile world and helping teams.
Yeah, it's always great engaging with you. I always enjoy our times together, and it's been my pleasure. I live for this kind of thing.
It's wonderful. Excellent. Well, I will see you on the 10th and hopefully we'll see everyone else as well.
Perfect. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Thanks.